The deputy was already taping the notice to the door when Nella Bruckner came up the stairwell with the last of her boxes, and he did not look at her, and she did not set the boxes down. She stepped around him. She got her toothbrush off the sink and the photograph of her mother out of the kitchen drawer and the one good knife. And she went back down past the neighbor who had lived across the landing for 4 years and who studied the carpet like it had just gotten interesting. It was 11 at night. The lot lights were on and moths were working them. Her car was a gray hatchback with a taillight held in place by red tape, and when she had everything in it, there was room for her, but only if she slept sitting up. She was 31 years old. 11 months from that night, she would stand in a county courtroom with her hands shaking and press play on the voice of a woman that town had agreed to stop believing 50 years earlier. And 90 seconds later, a man whose family name was carved over the door of the public library would put his face into both his hands and keep it there while the room went quiet around him. She did not know that. What she knew, sitting in the driver's seat with the photograph on the dash, was that she had $410, a car, and no address. For 9 years, she had been a medical transcriptionist. She had worn a headset 8 hours a day and typed what doctors said into a machine at 2 a.m. And she had been good at it in a way nobody ever congratulated her for, because the whole point of being good at it was that no one noticed you had been there. She could hear a word through a bad line, a chewed sandwich, a yawn, and a fan. She could hear the difference between a man who was tired and a man who was hiding something, which is not a skill anyone puts on a URSM. In March, the hospital moved its transcription to a service in another state. There were 14 people in her department. They got a letter and a cardboard box and a lanyard return envelope, and the letter used the word transition 4 times. After that, she took captioning gigs at 11 cents a running minute. She did the arithmetic on that once and then never again. Her rent went up $90 in June. She paid August by not paying the car, and she paid September by not paying August twice. And there is a point in that arithmetic where you are not behind anymore. You are simply outside of it. And she reached that point on a Tuesday. She slept 3 nights in the lot behind a laundromat because it had lights and a bathroom that opened at 6. On the 4th night, she was reading the county's public notices on her phone because she had turned off everything else on the plan and the notices were free. And that is where she found the list. It was a delinquent tax auction. The county was selling 38 parcels it had taken for unpaid taxes, and most of them were what you would expect, which is to say a 1/4 acre of hillside somebody's grandfather had bought out of a magazine, and a burned trailer, and a strip of land 11 feet wide that existed only because a surveyor made a mistake in 1922. The county did not want the parcels. The county wanted them back on the rolls. Minimum bid was whatever was owed, and on some of them what was owed was almost nothing, because nobody had assessed them in decades. Parcel 19 was a building. It was described in the flat cruelty of county language, structure, masonry, 2-story, former utility, Taro Bend Borough, condemned, sold AS is where is, no warranty of title or condition, purchaser assumes all liability. The minimum bid was $4. She read that 4 times. She kept expecting the number to grow a 0 while she was not looking. There was one photograph attached to the listing taken from across a street on a gray day, and she pinched it open on the cracked screen at midnight in a laundromat parking lot. A brick building on a corner, 2 stories, with its shoulders square to the street. A stone band over the door with letters cut into it that the photograph was too poor to read. The windows on the ground floor were sheeted over with plywood gone silver with weather. The windows on the second floor were not. She counted them without meaning to, because counting things you hear is the same muscle as counting things you see. 5 windows on the second floor. The auction was in 9 days, in a county she had to look up, 140 miles east, in the part of the state where the hills stop being scenery and start being an argument. She had $410. She had a car with 190,000 miles on it. She had a folding chair, a laptop, a headset with electrical tape on the cord, and a mother's photograph. And she had a very clear and specific understanding, developed over 4 nights, of what it costs a person to have nowhere to put her body when she is tired. $4 for a roof is not a decision. It is arithmetic. She spent 6 of the 9 days finding out what she was buying, and what she found out was mostly the shape of a hole. The parcel had a deed recorded in 1926 to a company that had merged into a company that had merged into a company that a court order broke up and scattered across 4 states. And somewhere in that chain, the building had simply been put down and forgotten. The taxes had gone unpaid since 1981. The county had let it ride because taking a building means owning a building, and then a clerk somewhere ran out of patience. Taro Bend, Pennsylvania, population 1,406, and that number was from a census she suspected of optimism. Slate in the hills above it, 1 quarry still working, and a library with a name over the door that also turned out to be on the ball field and on the sign at the edge of town that thanked you for visiting. The building itself was almost impossible to find in writing. 2 lines in a county history and 1 photograph in a digitized newspaper from 1952. And a single sentence in an engineering directory, Taro Bend Exchange, manual, cut over to dial service 1978. A telephone exchange. Before there were tones and before there were dials in that town, there was a building where the calls went, and inside the building there was a switchboard. And in front of the switchboard there were women with headsets who physically connected one human being to another human being with a cord in their hands. Every call, every night, every emergency. If you picked up a phone in Taro Bend between 1926 and 1978 and asked for the doctor, a woman 4 blocks away heard your voice first and put you through. And if she did not put you through, you did not get there. Nella sat with that in a laundromat and felt the hair move on her arms, and she could not have told you why. She had spent 9 years in a headset listening to people she would never meet. She just thought it was interesting. That is the whole reason she gave herself. She drove east on a Tuesday with the tank at 3/4 and the folding chair rattling, and the hills came up around the road and closed it in until the sky was a strip. She got to the county seat at 9:40 in the morning. The auction was in a room in the basement of the courthouse that had a drop ceiling, a coffee urn, and 11 people in it, 6 of whom were there for 1 parcel, which was river frontage. The clerk was a woman about 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a voice that had said these words so many times they had worn smooth. Her name was Dot Simmerly, and Nella only learned that because someone said it to her twice, both times to ask about a different parcel. Parcels went fast. Hillside, burn trailer, the 11-foot strip which sold to the neighbor for the taxes, and river frontage, which took 11 minutes and $39,000 and made the room briefly feel like a real auction. Then the room got up and started leaving, and the clerk read parcel 19 to the 6 people who remained. Structure, masonry 2-story. Former utility, condemned, $4. Nella raised her hand. She had rehearsed something to say and did not say it. The clerk looked over the glasses at her, and the room, which had been putting on coats, stopped putting on coats. $4, the clerk said. Anyone, nobody. A man by the door made a sound through his nose. Another man said something to him, and they both looked at her, and then they went out into the hallway, and their voices went down the hall and turned a corner and were gone. Sold, the clerk said, at $4, and then she took her glasses off, which she had not done for any other parcel. Honey, she said, do you know what that is? It's a building with a roof, Nella said. It's a building with a roof, the clerk agreed, in the voice of a woman agreeing that a lit match is a source of light. Nella paid in ones. She had the exact singles in her pocket because she had been in the habit for 4 nights of knowing exactly what was in her pocket. The clerk made her sign 4 places, and one of the places was a paragraph in bold that said the purchaser accepted the structure in its present condition and released the county from all claims arising from the condition of the structure, and Nella read every word of it because she had spent 9 years typing what other people said and had learned that the sentence nobody reads is always the sentence that was written on purpose. There'll be a code officer out, Dot Simmerly said. That building's got an order on it. You understand that? An order to demolish. You didn't buy a house. You bought a countdown. How long? That's between you and the officer. The clerk stamped the last page and slid it across, and then she did a thing Nella thought about for months afterward. She held the paper down with 2 fingers for a second before she let go of it. Nobody's bought that building in 50 years, she said. It's come up before. Every time it comes up, somebody buys it. Then they don't. They don't what? They don't. She took her fingers off the paper. Next parcel. Nella came out of the basement with a deed to a building in her hand and stood in the courthouse parking lot in the low gold October light and laughed out loud, once at nothing, the first sound like that she had made since March. Taro Bend came at her the way those towns do, which is all at once and after a curve. The road dropped, the hills leaned back, and there was a street with buildings on both sides of it and a creek running behind them under a green iron bridge, and above the roofs on the north side the hill went up steep and pale where the slate had been taken out of it in benches, like a staircase built for something much larger than a person. She found the corner of Ash and Low without looking for it, because the building told her where it was. The photograph had lied by being small. In person, it did not sit on the corner so much as hold it. Dark red brick, gone almost black at the mortar, 4 courses thick at the base, and over the door a band of pale stone with letters cut into it deep enough to hold shadow at 10 in the morning, Taro Bend Exchange. Under that, smaller 1926. The ground floor windows were plywood, silver, warped at the corners. There was a steel door with a hasp and a padlock the color of a rusted-out truck, and a paper on the door in a plastic sleeve that the weather had gotten into anyway. She read it. Notice of condemnation. Do not occupy. And a date and a signature and the words structurally unsound, unsafe for entry. She stepped back off the curb and into the street to see the whole thing, and she counted the second-floor windows. 5, 2 on the Ash Street side, 3 on the Low Street side, around the corner. Tall, arched at the top, glass still in most of them, and the glass full of that dead gray that windows go when there is nothing behind them but a room with the door shut. There was a hardware store 40 yards down the block, and Nella went in for a bolt cutter she could not afford and came out with a bolt cutter and a headlamp and a box of contractor bags, and while the young woman at the counter was ringing her up, she looked past Nella's shoulder out the window. "You're the $4, she said. It was not unfriendly. Her name tag said Junie. She was maybe 24, with a shaved side and a septum ring and a canvas apron. It went around this morning. Dot's sister does the ladies at the fire hall. That was fast. There's 1,000 people here, and 11 of them have jobs. Junie put the bolt cutter in a bag it would not fit in and gave up and handed it over bare. Nobody's opened that place since before I was born. Somebody must go in." "Kids, somebody know," Junie said, and she said it too quickly. And then she heard herself say it too quickly, and she shrugged one shoulder like she was shaking a hand off it. "It's just a rule, like an old people rule. You don't go in the exchange." She rang the drawer shut. Careful of the floor, though. That's a real thing. Second floor of anything around here, you walk the edges. The padlock had been on that hasp long enough to become geology, and it did not so much cut as crumble, and when Nella pulled the steel door, it came about 4 inches and stopped against a drift of 50 years of catalogs and grit and mousework packed against the inside. She put her shoulder into it, and it went, and the building breathed out at her. It was not the smell she expected. It was not rot. It was cold plaster and paper and machine oil and old dust, dry as a book, and under it something faintly like pencil shavings. A dead building that had died with the windows shut. She turned the headlamp on. The ground floor was one long room with a counter across the front third and a swinging gate in the counter, and behind the counter the floor was open and empty and enormous. There were bolt holes in the floor in ranks. Something big had stood there in rows and had been unbolted and taken out, and the linoleum around each bolt hole was a shade lighter, so the room was full of the shapes of machines that were not there anymore. A ceiling of pressed tin, mostly holding. On the back wall, a fuse panel with ceramic knobs and a hand-lettered card, and on the card, in a small, tidy engineer's print, toll, local 1 through 4, ringing, alarm, and beside alarm, somebody had drawn a small, careful star. Nella stood in the middle of that room for a long time. The stairs went up at the back, boxed in, with a door at the bottom that stood open on a spring gone slack. Junie's warning was in her head, so she went up on the edges with her hand flat on the wall. And the stairs held without so much as a complaint, because they were oak and they had been built by the same people who had made the walls 4 courses thick. The second floor was a hallway with rooms off it. She went down it slow, and this is what was there. A room on the left with a slate sink and a cast iron stove and a table and cups still on the table, 5 cups. Upside down on a towel that had become a fossil of a towel, a room on the right with a cot frame, no mattress, and a coat hook, and on the hook, a wire coat hanger. A locker room, or something like it, with 8 small wooden lockers, 7 of them standing open and empty, and one with the door off its hinge and leaned against the wall. A bathroom with the fixtures gone. 4 rooms. Windows in all of them. 2 on the ash side, 2 on the low side. The hallway ended in a plaster wall. She stood in front of it with the headlamp on it. It was a wall. It was painted the same institutional green as the rest of the hallway, and it had the same picture rail running along it at the same height, and the rail died into it and stopped, and there was a light switch on the wall beside it. A round brass push-button switch, the kind where one button is out and one is in. She flipped it out of pure animal habit, and something happened. There was a click in the wall. Not in the ceiling, in the wall. Then nothing. No light. The power to the building had been off since before Junie was born. Nella went back down the stairs and out the door and off the curb into the middle of Low Street. And she stood there in the cold with her heart going, and she looked up and she counted them again, and there is no possible way to count them and get a different answer. 5 windows on the second floor. 4 rooms. She slept in the car that first night, parked at the curb with the building over her like a held breath, and she woke at 6 because a county truck had pulled in behind her with its lights going, orange and slow. The woman who got out was in her 40s, tall in a navy uniform polo with a county patch and a jacket over it, with her braids up in a knot and a clipboard against her hip, and she had the walk of a person who has been sworn at in parking lots and has stopped finding it interesting. "You the buyer," she said. "Not a question. Prue Alderdice. County code. Get out of the car, please. This'll go faster if you can see what I'm pointing at." They stood in the cold on Low Street, and Prue Alderdice pointed at things for 20 minutes. The parapet, where a course of brick had let go on the creek side and there was a bow in it you could see from the ground once she showed you the plumb line beside it. the lintel over the third window, the gutter that had been pouring into the same 12 inches of foundation for 4 decades, which is how you take a wall apart with water and time and no hurry at all. Orders from 2 years ago, she said. It's not personal, it's arithmetic. That parapet comes off in a freeze and it lands on a sidewalk the school walks on. How long do I have? Right now, you have none. It's condemned. You're not to occupy it, and before you tell me you slept in your car, I know you slept in your car, I saw the seat back. She flipped a page. Here's your ladder out. You can petition to vacate the order. You bring me a report from a licensed structural engineer that says the building can be made safe and a scope of work and a timeline, and I take it to the board. They meet the second Tuesday. What does an engineer cost? More than $4. Prue Alderdice said it flat, without cruelty, which was somehow worse. She looked up at the parapet, and then at the stone band over the door, and then, briefly, at nothing. I'll give you 90 days before I put it on the demolition list. That's me being generous and my supervisor being on vacation. 90 days, and you're not sleeping in there, and if I find you sleeping in there, I have to write it, and if I write it, the 90 days is gone. She was at the truck door when Nella asked it. Why is there a wall at the end of the upstairs hall? The code officer stopped with her hand on the door. It was a small stop. If you had blinked, you would have called it nothing. You went upstairs, she said. I went upstairs. There's 5 windows and 4 rooms, Nella said. I counted from the street. Prue Alderdice got into the truck. She started it. Then she put the window down about 4 inches and said, through it, 90 days, and drove up Low Street and did not look at the building in her mirror, and Nella watched her not look at it. Emmett Cordray came on the 3rd day. He came at 4 in the afternoon in a clean silver pickup, 68 or so, heavy through the shoulders, silver hair combed straight back. A navy blazer over an open collar, and he got out and put his hand out from 6 feet away so she had time to see it coming, which is a thing certain men know how to do. You bought my building, he said, and he grinned, and she liked him. That is the part she came back to later. She liked him inside of 9 seconds, and she never entirely stopped. He walked her around it. He knew it better than she did. He put his palm on the brick at the corner and told her that his grandfather had hauled the stone for the door band out of the north bench with a team, 1 piece, and that the mason had cut the letters after it was up because he did not trust the rigging with a finished stone. He told her that his mother had worked in that building for 4 years before she married. On the board, 2nd shift, and that she used to say she knew every voice in the county and could tell you who was lying to their wife. You're not from here, he said, so I'll say the ugly part plain, because you'll hear it anyway. There's people in this town who'd like that corner, me being one. Fire hall's got no turnaround. Truck has to back out onto Ash into a blind curve, and it has been backing out onto Ash into a blind curve since before you were born, and one of these days it's going to meet the school bus. So buy the corner. I can't buy the corner. Nobody can buy the corner because nobody could ever find who owned it, and the county wouldn't take it because taking it means owning the parapet. He put his hands in his pockets, and now a girl from out of state bought it for $4 at a tax sale, and I have been laughing about that since Tuesday, because that is the funniest thing that has happened here in 9 years. Then he made his offer, $9,000, cash for the parcel. He said the number, and then he stood there and let it sit, because he knew. The way people who have money always know exactly what $9,000 sounds like to a person who does not have it. Nella stood on Low Street with a bolt cutter in her car and $401 in her pocket and $9,000 in the air in front of her. $9,000 was a deposit and a first month and a second month. It was an address. It was a door she could lock and a bed and a shower that belonged to her, and the arithmetic of it went through her so fast and so hot that she had to look away from him. And what she looked at, because it was the only thing on that street tall enough to look at, was the second floor. 2 windows on Ash, 3 on Low. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "What's behind the 5th window?" Emmett Cordray looked up at the building. He looked at it for a while. "Storage," he said. "It'd be storage. Those buildings, they'd wall off a room when the equipment changed, easier than fixing it." He looked at her, and he was still perfectly pleasant, and he was still perfectly kind, and he said 9,000. "You could be gone by Friday and never think about this town again, and I would call that a good week for both of us. Can I have a couple days?" "You can have till the 2nd Tuesday," he said. "After that, it's a demolition bid, and I'll be paying it, and then I'll own the corner anyway, and you'll own nothing." He said that without a shred of malice. He said it the way you would tell somebody the tide was coming. Then he shook her hand again and got in his truck, and he was 3 feet from pulling out when he stopped and put the window down. "Don't go upstairs," he said kindly. "That floor's 100 years old. And that, more than the wall, more than the windows, more than the clerk holding the paper down with 2 fingers, is what kept Nella Bruckner in Taro Bend. Because she had spent 9 years in a headset learning one thing better than she learned anything else in her life, which is what a person's voice does when they are telling you the truth in a sentence built to keep you from a different sentence. She did not take the 9,000, and she did not tell him no, which are 2 different things. And she used the difference to buy herself 11 days. She got a job at the truck stop out on the state route, 5 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, because a woman who can type 980 words a minute can certainly carry plates, and it paid cash at the end of every shift and had a shower in the back for drivers that the manager let her use if she cleaned it. Then she worked on the building from 2 until dark. She did not sleep in it. She kept that. She started with the gutter because a county officer had told her the gutter was killing the wall, and if somebody tells you where the wound is, you put your hand on it. 40 feet of it up a borrowed ladder, packed solid with 50 years of a maple tree's opinion. Under the last of it, where the downspout took the corner, she found the reason it had all backed up in the first place. Somebody had stuffed a rag in the elbow, not a leaf. A rag, wadded and driven in, the kind of thing a person does on purpose in about 4 seconds. She sat on the roof with the rag in her hand and looked at the town. Orrin Peachy found her because his kitchen window looked at the exchange and had for 50 years, and a light moving on that roof at dusk got him out of a chair he did not get out of quickly. He was 81, tall and folded a little at the top, with white hair standing off his head and wire glasses and a brown canvas coat. And he stood in the street and hollered up that she was on the wrong side of the parapet, which she was. She came down and he looked her over. "You're the $4, he said. "I have a name. I bet you do." He put his hand up on the brick and left it there, and it was the second time in 3 days she had watched an old man in that town put his hand on that wall like it was a horse. 40 years I climbed poles for the phone company. Started here. This was my building. He tipped his chin at the stone band. I strung half the wire in this valley, and I never once got to sit at that board. Wasn't for men. That was the rule then, and that was the only rule they ever kept. She got the folding chair out of the car and made him sit in it, and she sat on the curb. And he talked for 2 hours. The board was never on the first floor. The first floor was where the equipment went in later, and the racks came out in 78, and that is what the bolt holes were. The switchboard, the cords, the women, that was all upstairs on the corner under the windows because you needed light and you needed the girls to be able to see the street. 3 positions. Days had 3, evenings 2, and nights had 1. Nights had 1. The chief operator lived in the building. That was standard, and Orrin Peachy said it like it was nothing, and Nella thought about the cot frame and the coat hook and the 5 cups upside down on a fossil towel. She had a room. She had a stove and a slate sink. She was on the board or beside it for 51 weeks a year, and when the lines went down in a storm, she was the only thing between a farm at the top of the hollow and a doctor 11 miles away. Who was she? Verna Pike, Orrin said, and then he did not say anything for a while. The rain started on the 13th of April in 1968, and it did not stop for 4 days. Up on the north bench, above the town, the quarry had a settling pond, which is a polite way of saying a valley they had dammed with their own waste rock and filled with the gray milk that comes off cutting stone. It had been there since the 40s. It had gotten taller every year the way a thing gets taller when nobody is the person whose job it is to say stop. At 4:20 in the morning on the 17th of April, it let go. It came down the draw, and it took the north side of Low Street off its foundations and put it in the creek. 12 people died. Orrin Peachy said the 12 names in order without preparing to, the way you say something you have said at a fire hall in April for 50 years. And the story, the official story, the one in the inquiry and in the newspaper and on the bronze plaque by the bridge, was this. It happened at 4:20 in the morning, in the dark, in the rain, with no warning possible, and the town was asleep, and it was nobody's fault, and it was an act of God. Verna said different, Orrin said. What did she say? She said she had it. He was looking at the building, not at her. She said a man from the quarry rang her board at 10 minutes to 4 and told her the pond was coming over and to start ringing houses on Low Street. She said she started at the bottom because the bottom's where it had hit. She said she got through to some. And she said that at 4 o'clock the quarry rang her again, a different man, and told her to stop. The street was quiet. She said he told her they had it under control and they didn't want to panic, and she was to hold the calls until they verified, and she said she argued. And she said he asked her did she want to be the operator that emptied a town into the dark in the rain for nothing, and she said she stopped. He took his glasses off and cleaned them on his coat, badly, and put them back on. For 20 minutes. That's what she said. She said she sat there and did not ring anybody for 20 minutes, and then she rang them all anyway, and she was still ringing when it came down. And nobody believed her. Nobody could afford to, Orrin said. The company's lawyers went to the inquiry, and they did not call Verna Pike a liar, because you do not need to. They said she was a woman of 44 who worked nights alone in an empty building. They said that there was no record of the calls, and that if the calls had been made, there would be a record, and there was no record. They produced her logbook, which had a torn page. They said the strain of the night, and the noise of it, and the grief. Twice, in a public room, they used the word confused, and a doctor they had brought said the word hysterical, and it was 1968, and that was that. She was let go in November. She stayed in the building until the 7th of December because she had nowhere else to be, and then she went, and no one in Taro Bend has said her name out loud in a room with more than 4 people in it since. Where'd she go? I never knew, Orrin said. I was 30. I was a company man with 2 babies. I didn't ask. He looked at his hands. That is the whole of what I did about it, then and after. I didn't ask. Nella sat on the curb in the dark with a rag in her pocket that somebody had driven into a downspout. Mr. Peachy, she said, there's 5 windows up there and 4 rooms. He did not answer that. He got up out of her folding chair, slowly, and he handed it to her. And he stood in the street a long moment with his hat in his hand looking up at the 5th window like a man at a graveside, and then he went home. And if you are still with me at this point, and you want to know what was behind that wall, and whether that town was right about Verna Pike, stay, because the next part is the reason this building sat empty for 50 years. And it took a woman with a headset and a truck stop job 11 days to find it. She started on the wall at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday with a $5 drywall hammer from the hardware store, and Junie had thrown in a dust mask for nothing and had not said what she was thinking, which Nella appreciated more than the mask. The plaster came off in slabs the size of dinner plates, and under it there was lath, and under the lath there was not more wall. There was a door frame, oak painted the same green, mortised, with the hinge plates still screwed into it, 3 of them, the pins gone, and set into the frame, filling it edge to edge, 8 courses of concrete block laid by somebody who was not a mason and had not cared to become one. The mortar was squeezed out and never struck, and it had run down the face of the block and dried in gray tongues, because nobody was ever going to look at this wall again. That is the thing she stood there and understood, with the dust mask hanging off one ear. You do not plaster over a doorway to store things behind it. You store things behind a door, because a door opens. Somebody had put a door frame's worth of block into a door frame and then covered the block with lath and plaster and paint and run a picture rail across it so the hall would end in a wall the way halls end in walls. It took her the rest of Thursday and all of Friday. Concrete block laid dry, handed by an amateur, comes out 1 block at a time if you are patient, and she was. And by Friday at dusk, there was a hole in the middle of it the size of a car window, and cold air came out of it across her face, and she stood there with her heart slamming and did not put her head through it. She went and got the headlamp. Then she sat down on the hall floor for a minute because her legs had opinions. Then she put her head through. The room was there, all of it. 50 years of nobody, and the dust lying so flat and so undisturbed that it was not dust anymore. It was a surface, gray and soft as felt over everything, and where the light of the headlamp went across it, it went across without a single track in it. The board was under the windows, 3 positions, a long low console of oak and black steel, running the whole width of the corner with the 2 Ash Street windows over it and the face of it rising up in a wall of jacks, hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds, each one with a paper number under it gone the color of weak tea. The cords hung in their wells in 2 ranks, 3 chairs on casters, oak, with the seats worn pale in the middle. One of them was pushed back and turned at an angle 3 feet out from position 2, the way a chair sits when a person got up out of it fast and never came back to push it in. And on the wall, over the board, mounted on a bracket, was a brass electric bell, and beside the bell, painted on the plaster in a small careful hand, was a star. The 5th window was in the north wall, the Low Street side, and it had a roller blind pulled all the way down, and the blind had gone the color of tea too, and the light coming through the cloth of it filled that whole room with a low, even amber, so that the room was not dark. That is what she never got across to anybody afterward. It was not a dark room. It was a warm gold room, full of a light like the inside of a lampshade, and a switchboard and a chair pushed back. There was a desk beside the board, and on the desk, squared up, was a stack of logbooks, 9 of them, blackboards, cloth spines, the years in white ink on the front. She did not touch them yet. She put the light on the top one, and the top one said 1968, and there was a rubber band around it that had died and become a brittle brown line lying across the cover, and she did not touch it, because she had spent 9 years around records, and she had a feeling that had come up out of her spine and was standing on the back of her neck, which was, this is evidence. And I am the first person here, and I need to be able to say that later. She took photographs instead, 40 of them, on a cracked phone with a headlamp standing on the hall side of a hole in a block wall. And when she turned to go, she put the light on the wall behind the door frame on the hall side wall of the room itself, and there was a steel cabinet standing against it, gray, chest high. 2 doors, a piano hinge, a hasp with a padlock through it, and the padlock was not rusted out, and it was not 50 years old, and it did not match anything else in that building, and stenciled across the face of both doors in white letters 4 inches high was this: Service observation, property of the company, removal prohibited. Nella Bruckner came out of that building at 8 o'clock on A. Friday night, and sat down on the curb of Low Street in the cold, and she called nobody, because there was nobody to call, and she looked up. She had left the headlamp burning on the desk, and the old blind held the glow of it and spread it, so that the 5th window of the Taro Bend Exchange was lit, faint and amber, for the first time in 50 years. She laughed once, then she put her hands over her face and did not take them down for some time. She did not cut that padlock on Friday night. She wanted a witness, and she wanted the witness to be old. Orrin Peachy came at 7 in the morning in his brown coat with his hat on, which he had not worn to stand in the street, and he went up those stairs ahead of her, on the edges, with his hand flat on the wall, and he stopped at the hole in the block, and he took the hat off. He got through the hole better than she did. Then he stood in that low amber room with his hat in both hands, and he looked at the board for a long time, and his face did a thing she did not look at, because there are moments where the decent thing is to study your own boots. Then he walked over and he sat down in the chair at position 2. He put his hands on the edge of that desk, an 81-year-old man who had climbed poles in this valley for 40 years and had never once been permitted to sit where he was now sitting, and he said, well, and that was all he said about it, then or ever. She showed him the cabinet. Service observation, Orrin said. Sure, that's not a secret, that's just a thing nobody tells you the day of. The company graded the girls. They'd cut in and listen. Was she courteous? Was she quick? Did she stay on past the connection, which you weren't to do? This size office, they ran it on tape, and a man from the district listened at the end of the month and marked a card. He put a knuckle against the steel. It ran off a rack downstairs. That rack is one of them bolt holes now. So the machine's gone. Machine's gone, he agreed. Tape's not the machine. Then he looked at the padlock. And he got up out of the chair and he came over and he looked at it closer. And then he said, quietly, that's not company. No, that's a hardware lock. And it's not 50. He straightened up. The company didn't lock that cabinet, honey. Somebody locked that cabinet. The bolt cutter took it in one bite. There were 41 reels in that cabinet, in gray paper boxes, standing on edge in 4 rows like books, and every box had been labeled by hand in a small, hard, slanted pencil, and every label said a date and a position and a time span. 1964, 1965, 1966, whole months, and one box in the middle of the second row, standing a 1/4 inch proud of the others because it had been put back in a hurry or taken out and put back many times, said this: April 17, 1968, position 2, 3:30 to 5. Nella did not touch it for a while. The company had said there was no record. The company had said in a public room in front of 12 families that if the calls had been made, there would be a record, and there was no record, and therefore there were no calls, and therefore there was no woman sitting at a board at 4 o'clock in the morning being told to stop. There were 41 reels in a cabinet in a room somebody had bricked shut. Getting them to make a sound took 19 days and most of what she earned carrying plates. The deck she found was 2 counties east, listed by a man selling his late father's basement, and it cost her $80, and it did not work, and she carried it up those stairs anyway. Orrin took the cover off it and looked at it for 4 minutes and said the belt was gone, which is what happens to rubber in a basement, and then he went home and came back with a bicycle inner tube and a pair of scissors and a steel ruler, and he cut a belt out of it and stretched it over the capstan flywheel with the patience of a man who had spliced cable in sleet. Power was Junie. There was no service to the exchange and would not be, because the utility will not energize a condemned structure, and Nella found that out on a Tuesday and stood in the hardware store afterward with her hands on the counter, not saying anything for slightly too long. Junie Cade looked at her. Then Junie went out the back and came in with 300 feet of orange cord over her shoulder and said, "The outlet by the loading door is on the store's meter, and the store's meter is my aunt's problem. And my aunt is in Florida until March," and she ran that cord down the alley and up the outside of the exchange herself and would not let Nella pay her $1 for it. "Why?" Nella said. "Because I've lived here 24 years, Junie said, and I've been told my whole life not to go in that building, and nobody ever once told me why, and I'd like to know why. They tested it on a nothing reel. That was deliberate." Nella picked one from the front row, 1966, October, a Tuesday afternoon, because if the machine ate a tape, she wanted it to eat a tape that did not matter. The reel turned. There was hiss. There was the sound of a room, which is a sound, an actual sound, air in a space with a tin ceiling. There was a small metallic clatter she would learn was a cord going into a jack. And then a woman's voice, close and clear and about 40 years old, said, "Number, please." Nella Bruckner put her hand over her mouth. It was an ordinary call. A woman named on the tape only as Ruthie wanted the feed store and could not remember the number, and the operator gave it to her from memory without being asked, and then rang it for her, and then the two of them talked for 9 seconds about Ruthie's mother's hip, and the operator said, "I'll tell him you're coming then." And Ruthie said, "You're a peach, Verna." And the cord came out with a click. 19 seconds. That is the whole call. The three of them sat in that gold room, an 81-year-old lineman and a girl from the hardware store and a laid-off transcriptionist who had $400 in March. And nobody said anything for a long time, and outside on Low Street a truck went by and somebody's dog barked at it. "That's her," Orrin said. His voice had gone somewhere. "That's her. That's Verna. I have not heard that voice since I was 30 years old." Nella reached over and took the box out of the second row, the one standing proud, and she set it on the desk under the lamp, and she took the lid off. There was a reel in it, and folded under the reel, in the bottom of the box, there was a piece of paper. The paper was a sheet of the company's own log stock, folded twice, and the pencil on it was the same small hard slant that was on all 41 boxes. "To whoever opens this, I am not confused. They took my logbook A&D. They stood up in the courthouse. A&D said there is no record. There is a record. The company made it themselves to find out if I say good morning properly." Position 2. April 17, 3:30 to 5. The man who tells Emmy to stop at 4 o'clock says his own name at the start of it, because it had never once occurred to him in his life that anybody might be listening to him. Verna Pike, December 7, 1968. Orrin Peachy read it twice, and then he went and stood at the 5th window with his back to the room. The reel ran 51 minutes. It opens on a room in the rain. That is all it is for the first 16 minutes, and Nella came to know those 16 minutes better than she knew any other 16 minutes of her life. The hiss, the tin ceiling, water on glass, a chair, a woman turning a page, a woman humming 4 notes of something and stopping. Twice, the clatter of a cord and a number given. Because at 3:30 in the morning in a town of 1,400, almost nobody calls anybody. At 3:47, a jack lights. The man on it is not calm, and he does not say hello. He says, "Verna, Verna, it's dewy, I'm at the pond, it's over the crest, it's cutting the face out, it is coming, get him off Low Street, get him off right now." And a woman's voice, the same voice that had told Ruthie she was a peach, says one word. Which end? The bottom. "Verna, the bottom, it'll take the bottom first." There is a sound like a deck of cards being shuffled hard. That is a woman putting cords into jacks. For the next 13 minutes, the tape is a person doing a job. She does not panic and she never once raises her voice, and it is worse for that. This is the operator. This is Verna at the exchange. You listen to me now. The pond is over. You get everybody out of that house and you go up the hill to Ash Street. Not the bridge. Do not go to the bridge. Go up. Again, a man who does not understand and asks her twice if this is a joke. A woman who starts crying, and Verna says, "No, no coat, and children, and the door, go," and pulls the cord. At 3:58, she rings a house on the bottom of Low Street, and a man answers on the second ring, wide awake, and he does not argue with her at all. "How long have I got?" he says. "I don't know. Not long." "All right," he says. "All right. I'll go down the row." "Verna, I'll take the row. You get on up the hollow. There's nobody up there'll hear it." "Curtis, go on and ring them," he says, and the cord clicks out. At 4 o'clock, a jack lights on an incoming toll line, and a man's voice comes onto the tape, and this voice is different from every other voice on that reel because this voice is comfortable. "Verna, this is August Cordray. Now stop what you're doing." You can hear her stop. What follows is 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and it is the most ordinary conversation in the world. He tells her the watchman is a drunk, and everybody in the valley knows it. He tells her they have men on the crest right now, and it is holding, and they will know inside the hour. He tells her that she has already rung, a dozen houses, and now there are old people out in the rain at 4 a.m. in April, and does she understand what that costs? And does she understand who pays it? She says the word pond, and he says the word panic. She says, "Mr. Cordray." He said it was cutting the face out, and August Cordray says, "Dewey Fraun has said a great many things." Then she says, "I'm going to keep ringing." And there is a pause on that tape of 2.5 seconds, and then the comfortable voice says, "Verna, you hold those calls until we verify. You've been at that board 22 years, and you have a room in that building and a pension coming out of it, and I sit on the council that gives the company its rate. And I am telling you, as a friend of yours, that this is a night you want to have done what you were told." And Verna Pike says, "Yes, sir." Then the tape is a room for 19 minutes and 40 seconds. That is the part Nella could not get through the first time and did not get through the second time either. 19 minutes and 40 seconds of hiss and rain and a tin ceiling and a chair moving twice and a woman breathing, and once at about the 11-minute mark, a small sound in the back of a throat that is not a word. At 4:19 and 40 seconds, the cards start shuffling again. She rings for 51 seconds. You can hear her going down the board fast now. No greeting, no operator voice, just get out, it's coming, get out. And then at 4:20 and 41 seconds, there is a sound on the tape that Orrin Peachy stood up out of the chair for. It is not a bang. It is low and it is long and it does not stop. And under it, the brass bell over the board starts. And then the jacks start going dark. And you can hear her over the bell and the sound saying hello into chords that are not connected to anything anymore, because there are no houses on the other end of them. At 4:22, she rings the bottom of Low Street. She rings it 11 times. Nobody picks up. The last thing on the reel at 4:31 is Verna Pike saying to nobody in an empty building in the dark, in a voice that has nothing left in it at all, "Curtis, Curtis, pick up." Then the tape runs out. Here is what a laid-off medical transcriptionist does with 51 minutes of tape. She digitized all 41 reels onto a laptop over 9 nights, at 11 at night after a shift carrying plates, because that is when the truck stop let her sit in a booth near an outlet. Then she put on a headset with electrical tape on the cord and did the only thing on earth she had ever been paid to be excellent at. She transcribed it, every word, every speaker, every timestamp to the second, with the inaudibles marked as inaudible, and nothing smoothed and nothing guessed. 62 pages, in the format a hospital had trained her to produce for 9 years, and then thrown away in a cardboard box with a lanyard envelope. She made 4 copies of the audio. One went to Orrin Peachy. One went to the state's public utility archive with a letter. One she mailed to herself, unopened, for the postmark. One she carried. Then she knocked on the door of the county code officer at 8 in the morning, and Prue Alderdice listened to 4 minutes of it standing up in her own kitchen with a coffee cup in her hand. And then she set the cup down and did not pick it up again. "Second Tuesday," she said. "Public comment. I'll put you on it myself." The town found out inside of 30 hours. Junie Cade's aunt called from Florida on a Thursday, having heard from somebody who had heard, and the orange cord came off the loading dock outlet that afternoon. And Junie stood in the alley and cried about it exactly once, and then borrowed a generator off her cousin and ran it in the alley on gas she paid for herself. Emmett Cordray came back on Friday and raised his offer to $22,000, and he was not warm this time, and he was not cold either. He was frightened, and Nella heard it, because it is a sound. And somewhere between Friday and Monday, a request went in to move the demolition of Parcel 19 from the discussion column to the action column. And Prue Alderdice called Nella from the county lot and said one sentence: "It came from the borough, not from me." Verna Pike took 11 minutes to find. That was the thing that broke Nella's heart worse than the tape. Not a private investigator, not a records request. 11 minutes on a public database, on a cracked phone, in a parking lot. She was 94. She was in a care home 40 miles away in the next county, where she had been since 1969, and no one from Taro Bend had ever driven 40 miles. She was small in the chair, and her hair was white and thin and combed. And she had a cardigan on, and her hands were folded, and when Orrin Peachy walked into that room, she looked at him for a long moment and said, "You strung the wire on Ash," and Orrin had to sit down. Nella crouched down by the chair, so she was not standing over her. "Miss Pike," she said, "I bought the exchange. I opened the switch room." The old woman's hands did not move. She looked at the window. It took her a while. "Did the block come out clean?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." "They laid it wet, and they laid it in a hurry," Verna Pike said. "I watched them do it." 1978. I drove up, and I sat across the street in my car, and I watched 2 men from the borough brick up my room, and I thought, well, there it is. There is 50 years. She turned her head, and her eyes were perfectly clear, and she looked at Nella Bruckner the way you look at a stranger who has just said a word in your first language. "You found the cabinet. I found the cabinet. Is he still in the library?" Nella did not have to ask who. "Yes, ma'am. He's on the library and the ball field and the sign at the edge of town." Verna Pike nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had settled long ago and had simply been waiting to have read back to her. They asked her to come to the meeting. She said no, and she said it without any heat at all. "I said it once in a courthouse," she said, "in front of the mothers, and a doctor who never examined me said I was hysterical. And I went home, and I was 44 years old, and I had nowhere to be." She put her hand flat on the arm of the chair. "You play it. I have heard it." The second Tuesday in December, the County Code Appeals Board sat in the main courtroom at the county seat because the borough had filed to accelerate the demolition of Parcel 19, and the docket put them in the same room. And the room held 61 people, and there were 110. They came from Taro Bend. They stood along the walls and out into the hall and down the stairs. Junie Cade was there in her apron because she had come straight off the counter. Orrin Peachy was there in a tie. Dot Simmerly was there, and she was not working. Emmett Cordray sat in the second row in his navy blazer with his hands on his knees, and in the front row, on the aisle, was a man of 72 in a denim jacket and a ball cap, weathered down to the grain, and he had signed the sheet to speak against her. His name was Royce Tillman. He had lived his whole life in a town where 12 people died in the dark, and one of them was his father, who had been found 400 yards down the creek, out of his house, in the rain, in his boots, and Royce Tillman had spent 50 years being the son of the man who had been too bullheaded to stay in bed. Nella Bruckner had 5 minutes of public comment. She had a laptop and a speaker Junie had carried over from the store, and 62 pages nobody had asked for. She did not make a case. She had decided that in the car at 4 a.m. on the way back from a care home 40 miles away. "My name is Nella Bruckner," she said. "I bought the exchange for $4. In the room behind the wall on the second floor there are 41 reels of tape that the phone company recorded of its own operators to grade them on courtesy. Your inquiry was told there was no record. I'm not going to talk. I'm going to play you 90 seconds, and it starts at 3:58 in the morning on the 17th of April, 1968. Then she pressed a key and put her hands behind her back and looked at the floor. 58 years of hiss came out of a hardware store speaker into a courtroom. A woman's voice said, "The pond is over. You get everybody out of that house and you go up the hill." And a man's voice, wide awake, without 1 second of argument in it, said, "How long have I got?" Somewhere in the second row a chair moved. "I don't know. Not long." All right. I'll go down the row." "Verna, I'll take the row. You get on up the hollow. There's nobody up there. I'll hear it." "Curtis, go on and ring them." Click. Nobody in that room breathed. Nella let it run. "Verna, this is August Cordray. Now stop what you're doing." There is a sound 110 people make when they all hear the same name at the same time, and none of them says it out loud. It ran to the end. It ran through the drunk and the panic and the men on the crest. It ran to the 2.5 seconds of pause, and then that comfortable voice said, "You've been at that board 22 years, and you have a room in that building and a pension coming out of it, and I sit on the council that gives the company its rate, and I am telling you, as a friend of yours, that this is a night you want to have done what you were told." And a woman said, "Yes, sir." Nella stopped it there. 90 seconds. After that, she said, "The tape is a room for 19 minutes and 40 seconds. I have it. I'm not going to play it to you. You all know what time the pawn came over, and you can do that arithmetic yourselves." She closed the laptop. She started ringing again at 4:19. She was still ringing when it hit. The last thing on the tape is her calling a house on Low Street 11 times. Nobody in that room learned anything that night that the town had not always known in the place where a town keeps the things it is agreed not to say. Verna Pike was never confused. She had only never been asked a question she was allowed to answer. Royce Tillman stood up in the front row. He had signed the sheet, so the chairman said his name, and he stood there holding his ball cap in both hands, and he could not do it. He tried twice. The third time what came out was, "That's my dad. That's my dad's voice." And then he sat down and put his hand over his eyes, and Dot Simmerly came out of the third row and sat next to him and put her arm around him in front of everybody. And nobody in that courtroom found that strange. Emmett Cordray stood up. He was not asked to. He stood up in the second row and put his hands on the bench in front of him, and he had had his face in his hands for a long time, and it showed. "I was wrong about this," he said. "I have been wrong about this my whole life, and I want it said in a room where everybody can hear me say it." He looked at the front of the room, and then he made himself turn around and look at the town instead. "In the fall of 1981, my father told me to go over to the exchange and put a rag up the downspout so the gutter wouldn't drain. I was 23. I did it in about 4 minutes, and I never thought about it again. And I have told the story of the $4 all week like it was a joke. He stopped. He got himself back. I have wanted that corner for 30 years for a fire truck turnaround, he said. I want you all to know I never once knew why that building would not die. Prue Alderdice did not stand up because she was at the table, and county officers do not make speeches. She waited until the room was quiet, and then she said, for the record, that the condemnation of Parcel 19 was hers, that it was correct on the day she wrote it, and that she was moving to vacate it and hold the demolition 1 year. On the ground that the structure now had a documented historical use and an owner willing to work. Then she looked up over her glasses at Nella and added one sentence that was not procedure. I've driven past that wall for 11 years, she said, and I never once counted the windows. The board vacated the order 5-0. Auguste Cordray died in 1981, 4 months after he sent his son to a downspout with a rag, and he is buried under a granite stone at the top of the hill in a plot that looks down over the whole valley, and nothing that happened in that courtroom moved a single ounce of him. That is the part nobody tells you about a thing like this. He is not punished. He is only finally named. The transcript went to the state's public utility archive, and the archive has it as a permanent public record, and it went to the county historical file, and it went, at Emmett Cordray's own written request in March, to the library board. The name came off the library. He asked for that himself and paid for the stonework himself, and there is nothing over that door now but public library, and the ball field is the ball field, and the sign at the edge of town thanks you for visiting on behalf of nobody at all. He also paid for the structural engineer and the parapet and 40 feet of gutter, and when Nella tried to argue with him about it in the hardware store. In front of Junie, he said, "This is not a favor, and it is not an apology. My family took that gutter apart. My family is going to put it back," and he walked out. The bronze plaque by the bridge still says what it says because the state will not let you take down a historical marker. There is a second one beside it now. It has the 12 names on it, which the first one never did, and under the 12 names it has one line. At 3:47 in the morning, the warning was given. At 4 o'clock, it was stopped. At 4:19, the operator began again alone. They brought Verna Pike home on a Saturday in May. Orrin Peachy drove at 40 miles an hour the whole way with his hat on. It took 4 of them to get the chair up those oak stairs, and Junie went up backward, and Royce Tillman took the other end and did not say a word the entire time and would not let anybody spell him. The room was clean. The dust was gone, and the board was oiled, and the cords hung in their wells, and the blind was up, and the 5th window had been reglazed and washed on both sides. And May came through it across the whole room and lit the jacks up like a wall of little brass eyes. They rolled her to position 2, and Orrin locked the chair. Verna Pike sat and looked at that board for a long time. Then she reached out and picked the headset up off the desk, and it was 58 years old, and it was hers, and she put it on. And she settled the band with 2 fingers the way she had settled it 10,000 times, and her hand went out and rested on the edge of the desk in the exact worn place her hand had made. Nobody said anything. Orrin stood behind her chair with his hat against his chest. She was 94 years old, and she sat at her board in her building in the light out of her window. And after a while she said, to the room, in the voice that had told a man which end of the street, "Number, please. Verna Pike died in September at 95 in Taro Bend, in the room with the slate sink and the cast iron stove, which Nella Bruckner had spent the summer making into a room a person could live in. 400 people came. The fire hall could not hold them, and they stood out in the lot. Nella lives in the exchange." She has a rack of drives and a headset with electrical tape on the cord, and 40 more reels out of that cabinet that nobody alive has ever heard. 1964 through 1967, whole months of an American town talking to itself in the middle of the night through one woman who put every call through and remembered every number and was never once, in 51 years, asked what she knew. Nella has transcribed 9 of them so far. She says there are things in them. The 5th window is lit every night. You can see it from the bridge. If you sat with this one the whole way, thank you. Genuinely, I'd like to know where you're listening from tonight, because this channel is mostly people sitting up late, and it helps to know the room isn't empty. And I want to leave you with a thing I have not been able to put down since I first read that transcript. It is 4 o'clock in the morning. There is a man on your line who signs your pension and sits on the council, and he is telling you, kindly, as a friend, that the men on the crest will verify within the hour, and that you do not want to be the woman who emptied a town into the rain for nothing. Under you is a street full of sleeping houses. You have 2 hands and a board. Would you have kept ringing, or would you have said yes, sir, and waited and told yourself what most of us would tell ourselves, that the people whose job it is to know surely know? Sit with which one is actually true about you. Next time on this channel, a woman pays $6 for a burned-out rural depot with a locked freight office nobody has opened since the line quit. And what is still on the shelf in that office is the reason the train stopped. Subscribe if you want to be there when that door comes open. And in Taro Bend, it is dark now and cold, and the creek is going under the Green Iron Bridge the way it has gone under it since before any of them were born, and up on the corner of Ash and Low, a brick building sits square to the street with its shoulder set. 4 windows are dark. 1 is gold.